Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let's talk just at the beginning of this, Rodney, about the territories and the importance of the territories. But I guess before we start with the territories, people have asked this question over and over again, and the question is, when did professional wrestling start? Well, as far as wrestling goes, I believe it was even on the walls, the cave walls with the caveman. They had wrestling
That
moves.
is that is correct. That is correct. And of course, the Greeks and Romans both had wrestling as well. But yeah, I think it's because Gordon Tully has always told us that it goes back. This is the oldest sport in the world. Not professional wrestling, but wrestling in general. And of course, cavemen had cave drawings. He explained that many times. And our education, of course, is from Gordon.
So Gordon could have been making that up at the point in time, but
Well, no, I don't think so, because there are. I think wrestling was a part of the original games, Olympic Games and stuff like that. So yeah,
so professional wrestling been along, not the modern day wrestling, but
no,
but 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 wrestling in general has been around longer than any other sport, if you want to call wrestling a sport. Uh,
but Brian's telling us that running was the first sport, and then wrestling was the second oldest sport.
there you go. Well, there you go. I'm
And
sorry.
he would know, and he would know. I don't agree. Running
Yeah,
would be correct because those cavemen had to run for those other animals as they were hunting them down.
but professional wrestling. Let's talk about people who ran professional wrestling promoters. Before the territory system, promoters ran wrestling. You had so many different people promoting yeah, just in the 1890s, the 1900s, the early 1900s. I just found out a guy named John Kotos or something, Contos, was promoting Georgia in the 1920s. And this would be prior to the other two promoters that came before Paul Jones for Georgia Championship Wrestling. So people had been promoting wrestling and very successful events into the tens and 20,000s, 30,000 people that came and saw wrestling back in the 1900s and even before then. But let's talk about how it became promotions territories. That would all start on the Gold Dust Trio. Now, other people have said they are the ones that invented the modern day wrestling. But the Gold Dust Trio came up with the idea of, hey, let's do this. Let's bring these wrestlers back on a regular occurrence, and we can, hey, if we do that, we can have disqualification. We can figure out a way to cheat. And we can make return matches. Gold Dust Trio, and this was in the 1920s. And they were the first people who made an event of cards where they might be 4 or 5 or 6 matches within that card.
They put together a package, more or less.
And everybody at that point decided, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to copy them. They were successful for around 10 years until.
So what you're saying, let me try to clarify here to put it in today's context. Someone was a success at doing something, so everybody copied.
Yeah.
Kind of like everybody copies the WWE because they're successful. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you really think about it, Toots, which was a major person in the WWF, he started from people stealing from him. From that point on, the WWF or WWE have been copied for years going forward. Now, after this occurred, there was World Heavyweight Champions. And we have talked about the World Heavyweight Champions and how they, there was a swerve over here. There was what they always call it. They always called it something. Screw job, I guess. The screw job. on all these people. And really and truly, they wanted to put it together and have one world champion. So in the 1940s, 1950s, promoters got together and said, we need to get the National Wrestling Alliance. They were already a National Wrestling Association that they tried to do really in the 30s, in the 40s, but it never happened. So really the first of the territories, when we consider the territories, was the National Wrestling Alliance. Do you agree with that, Rodney?
Yes.
And when you look at that, now the reason the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, came along, and the reason the WWF came along is because, hey, they didn't like who the champion was going to be. I think Vern Gagne wanted to be his own champion. He
wanted to be the champion, and nobody, the rest of them said no.
And WWF did not like the ideal of Lou Thesz. WWF did not like the idea of Lou Thesz going to be the champion. So they made Buddy Rogers their champion at the time. Let's talk about the territories of the time. Florida, you had Florida. People were running Florida Championship Wrestling. It may have been Championship Wrestling from Florida, even at the beginning. But Eddie Graham was probably one of the smartest promoters. Do you believe because Cowboy Luther trained Eddie Graham in everything he knew is the reason Eddie Graham became
certainly because of the success that he had in promoting, for sure? Probably not in the wrestling, not in the ring stuff, but surely about promoting, because Cowboy was very successful down there. And at certain points, the Welches also had a lot to do with Florida.
And you can't take away anything from the Welches, because at one time, Roy Welch promoted wrestling in more cities than probably any promoter of that time was promoting wrestling. Let's talk a little bit about territories and how they worked. Because when you look at Georgia probably worked different than Florida did. Because I think, and I'm pretty sure, that Eddie Graham had some local promoters in each city. But I think by and large, he was the promoter for all the cities. When you take Georgia Championship Wrestling, completely different. Because Georgia Championship Wrestling had Fred Ward as a promoter as well. And at some point, Charlie Harbin had something to do with promoting there and had something to do with Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, I don't know if that was his town and he paid 10% to I'm not for sure how that worked. Do you remember, did Charlie Harbin, was that his town, or was he just taking care of that town for Jim Barnett?
Well, what you're talking about, Chattanooga.
Yeah.
Well, in the beginning, Charlie was the promoter of Augusta and Rome. And because Chattanooga TV for years was primarily from Rome, Georgia, I would assume, and I'm just guessing here, that because the TV Chattanooga was Rome and Charlie Harbin was the promoter there, then automatically Chattanooga became Charlie's. And I'm just guessing, but I would say that would make more sense, that if you've had a promoter that's been promoting Rome, Georgia from that particular TV, it would only seem right that Charlie would continue to promote even for Chattanooga.
At some point, Charlie Harbin disappears. I don't think he passed away. He just disappeared in the 1980s, didn't he? Somewhere around
when it all falls apart. Georgia completely falls apart when they start doing the Ohio tours, and that was it. I know he wasn't around when we were doing the I know he was around when we were doing the Georgia Championship Wrestling All-Star or Superstars there. He was not there. But it all of that fell apart when Georgia went to Ohio, West Virginia, and Michigan. It, of course, as we've said, that was the beginning of the end for that particular promotion. They were doing very great business in the northern towns, and they just pretty much just abandoned the southern towns. And I guess if you don't have any, if they're not running your towns anymore, you're out. You just say, okay, I guess I'm out.
Is that a downfall of Georgia Championship Wrestling? Instead of having the different promoters in the different places, oh, we've decided we want to take everything. We're gonna promote, and we're gonna be the one that's promoting Ohio. We're gonna be the ones that promote, and really, if we can, we're gonna try to get rid of Fred Ward and Macon and Columbus. We'll run something else instead, so we don't have to deal with them, and we make all the money. Was in the end? Was that a mistake by the territories of wrestling of not having all those local promoters that were around at the time?
Well, they surely did destroy their infrastructure when they did that. All that years of building with Fred Ward in Macon and Columbus, that was all gone. Because in Columbus and in Macon, both had their own productions. Georgia was not willing. The Atlanta office was not willing to put original productions in those markets for whatever reason, which is a terrible idea, by the way. When you're showing on a national show on TBS, or TCG or Super 17, whichever it was called at that time, when you're playing a show on Saturday night and then turn around and show the same exact thing the next Saturday, people tune in. I've already seen that, and they tune out. That's what was happening there. But yeah, it was when you destroy your partnerships in your markets, yeah, it becomes all on you. And then they just completely, as far as Georgia goes, they completely abandoned it, as we've said before. Ratings were awful. We understand why, because they were putting that TBS show, bicycling those old hours that everybody's already seen before. If you're going to watch wrestling, you're going to watch the Saturday night show on Channel 17 off the cable. You're not going to watch your local show anymore. We've already seen that. It was a terrible idea. I'm not sure whose idea that was, but it was just terrible. It was cheap, and they would have been better off of doing a third hour, if not in Chattanooga or not in Atlanta, somewhere, one of the other markets. But yeah, for sure, that to me, and I think I said it on Brian's show. The day that Georgia Championship Wrestling announced they were going to Columbus, Ohio, was the beginning of the end for the state of Georgia itself, not for the company, but for wrestling in the state of Georgia itself.
When they were putting together the National Wrestling Alliance in the 1940s and the 1950s, let's look at the promoters of that time. A lot of times when they were looking at the territories and they were looking at how they were going to run the towns, there might have been, let's say Alabama, for instance. At that time, they had the Fields was running down in the lower part of Alabama. Billy Golden was running in Montgomery. Nick Goulas was running Florence and Huntsville
and
Birmingham. So it wasn't like Nick Goulas was running everywhere, but Billy Golden was also getting his talent, a lot of his talent, from Roy Welch. And in the same thing, they were all kinned down in the lower part, so that they were getting talent from there. So they had such a large talent pool to go for, but they didn't have to worry about if you were trying to be Mid-South Wrestling and you were only Bill Watts. And at the beginning, Bill Watts had local promoters, Jimmy Kilshaw, and in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Charles D'Amico was a promoter in Alexandria, Louisiana, and all these people, honestly, helped them. If all the towns did bad for the week, Bill Watts didn't lose every bit of the money because he had those people, Jimmy Kilshaw, and he had those local promoters that would help take care of the cost a little bit. Was this a downfall when the 80s come around? When all the promoters evidently they wanted to make all the money, and they got rid of all the little local promoters.
Well, certainly that local appeal was gone. That person working inside that market was gone. And I believe, from what I remember from the sheets, Bill Watts mainly got a booking fee, from what I remember.
Yeah,
it seems like they paid for the TVs as well. But yeah, when you took and you pulled, you eliminated them, then all that expense, all of that risk comes on you, for sure.
that was a mistake in the 80s.
That was absolutely a mistake. Absolutely a mistake. By taking and cutting those local promoters out was a terrible mistake, because then you took on all of the risk. It comes on you, and in the end, it was over. It's over.
When I was thinking about it today, when you take a territory, and let's say, for instance, when Ron Fuller buys the southern end, basically Dothan, Alabama, Pensacola, Mobile, Mississippi, which at some point, for whatever reason, uh, Ron Fuller really didn't take over the Mississippi part of that at the beginning. I don't. Maybe the Culkins did that at the point. Maybe they ran wrestling in Mississippi instead. But here's the question I have to ask of this though: you think people understand what they had to do to get ready to run those territories? The thought process. Okay, on Mondays I'm gonna. We know that Birmingham's running on Mondays. It's run for years, but Nick Goulas's business was pretty dismal by the end of that run. How hard was it for Ron Fuller to go in and take over a TV time slot that wasn't doing well to begin with? Did he go in and do people understand, okay, I've got to run this market, and without a television, I have no way to tell my story. I have no way to get my wrestlers over. Now I've got to go into Birmingham, and I've got to go from where Nick Goulas was having Mr. Pogo on the main event against, I don't know, Izzy Slapowitz on the main events. I've got to overcome that. How hard was it for Ron Fuller to overcome that to get to start drawing a Birmingham down? Because we know he gets there.
Well, the main problem with Nick Goulas, and it becomes the problem with just about every promoter, is talent, wrestlers. And what happened is, Nick had George, Bobby Eaton, and Tojo for years. And that talent never, and especially once the split came with Jarrett, then it got harder for Nick to get talent. Occasionally, Georgia would send people over. But in the end, the lack of talent and the lack of people wanting to work for Nick was his downfall. The first thing Ron goes in is he eliminates all of them, all the old talents there, and he brings fresh, new talent that hasn't been seen there in quite some time back to Birmingham. And for those people who are still wrestling fans, when they saw that and this opportunity, he brought in some. I mean, when Ron first went down there, he brought in some heavy hitters. He brought the Stomper, Don Carson. Of course, he was already down there before. But people in Birmingham had seen Don Carson for many years. The Stomper hadn't been there for years either. And then, of course, Bob Armstrong. I mean, look at the talent. And he himself, Robert Fuller, all came in. This is Jimmy Golden, all very talented people, something that Birmingham hadn't seen in a long time, because they had been seeing, let's just say, less than quality wrestlers. And when you take that group and replace them with what Nick had, you had nothing but business. It took a while. Sure, it was rough in the beginning, but every week it keeps coming up. And that's because of the change of the talent. And if you notice, the same thing happens just about with every territory. When it starts to fail, the wrestlers leave. And when it starts to leave and you can't get anybody else to come in and wrestle anymore, those ratings start to go down, the crowds go down, and eventually you're out. And that's what happened to Nick in the end. He just couldn't get any talent anymore.
The good thing about Ron Fuller at the time, Jim Barnett was sending talent from Georgia to Birmingham. Wrestling 2 was going there, and I guess off of that television, Wrestling 2 and the Stomper. So it kind of helped, just because Bob Armstrong was on that television show as well, of coming back to Birmingham. Now the big boys are what they've seen on cable.
Well, have you ever seen what Ron says about them?
About the rinky-dink wrestlers?
About the rinky-dink wrestlers. And what happened here is you had some of these fat, out-of-shape slobs that shouldn't be in the wrestling ring in the first place. What we've got now is we've got athletes right here, and I'm the top athlete here. And it was really very entertaining. Ron was very entertaining. And then, of course, he'd come in as a heel in Alabama at first. And, of course, they're getting ready for the big tournament. I think that's what they were going to do, the Southeastern Championship tournament. And so, yeah, Ron was saying, yeah, what you people be used to seeing these fat, out of shape, not very athletic people now. And now we're going to have some very athletic people. A dig at the previous promotion, sure. But as far as what Ron was trying to do, get heat on himself, that worked. It worked.
people who look at the Southeastern Championship Wrestling, and they look at the Monday was Birmingham, Alabama.
Mhm.
Tuesday was Mobile, Alabama. And that's after Ron takes over for Nick Goulas. When he first goes, he doesn't run Birmingham, Alabama, but I think by 1981, he's running Birmingham, Alabama. Tuesday was Macon. I think Wednesday they must have took off because I can't really find. Thursdays was Montgomery. I think Fridays was a spot show somewhere around. Saturday morning, they did television in Dothan at the WTVY studios. Saturday night was the Houston County Farm Center. And
originally Dothan was on a Friday night.
That's
so they did TV in the morning, and then Saturday, I think Charlie was saying on Saturdays normally it was New Brockton on some of those nights in Panama City,
and then Sundays was Pensacola, Florida. All these shows led to Ron Fuller only. There was no local promoters. There were no local people around there. It was Ron Fuller. The percentages that were given, I think Ron might have had like 50%. And the other percentages, I believe, were just given to the rest of the people. I don't think they bought those. They were just given to them, which did happen a lot in wrestling.
From my recollection, it was 50-50 Ron and Robert. Robert sold portions of his off to other people as the time went by. He sold his he sold part to Jimmy, he sold part to Bob, or as given, whatever the case may be. And then Roy Lee actually was the second largest owner, if I'm not mistaken. Roy Lee. It came Ron, then Roy Lee, and then everybody else was Robert, Jimmy, and Bob were all 10%. If my information is correct, and that's just by recollection. But I believe in the beginning it was Ron and Robert, as I think he alludes to that he needed money, so he sold part of his off.
You know, when you look at the territories of that era, it worked really good in the 50s. It worked really good in the 60s. It worked really good in the 70s, but in the 80s there was a tearing down portion. We were there in Southeastern in 1983. When we came there, business was horrible. I mean, it was absolutely horrible. It got better because wrestling had these roller coaster rides, and they knew
cycles is what they called them.
They called them cycles, but if you really watch the product, you can kind of see why they wasn't drawn, even though we've never believed in cycles. And the reason we never believed in it, I remember having an argument with our father over cycles. And we would say, well, if that was true, is the cycles different for every city? I mean, because they had to have been different for every city, because while Birmingham was doing horrible, Knoxville, Tennessee was doing tremendous business. You would do 6,000, 7,000 people in Knoxville. Well, you could only do 1,000 people in Birmingham. So the cycle was only
there were several reasons of what happened in Birmingham. Birmingham, first thing is Channel 6. The sabotage began locally there with Channel 6 in Birmingham started preempting the show just at every week. I mean, it was just like it was every week you were on at 11 o'clock at night. Nobody could find the show. We switched over. Of course, they were playing at the same time. They were playing Channel 6 and Channel 20 at the same time. They switched to Channel 20 exclusively, and that didn't really help either. And that made it even worse. And then the real worst thing is when they moved to Channel 17, Channel 1744, I think it was. And that was, it even got worse. I mean, it got majorly worse. Whereas Channel 6 in Knoxville would keep the show on. I mean, and at one point they played it 2 times during the week. They would play it during its regular time, which was Sunday, I believe, at 1 o'clock. And then they would play again through the week at midnight, it seems like.
Here was the thing about Birmingham. Everybody, when Continental Wrestling Federation went out of business, they blamed everybody. wrestlers blamed dad, they blamed it. But the truth was, it wouldn't have mattered what was going on at the time, no matter how great the booking was in Birmingham. In Birmingham specifically, the television was messed up so bad that people didn't even know that Continental Wrestling even existed. And what made it worse is the buildings even got messed around. The Boutwell Auditorium for the 62 time had been redone. So we had to move to a place that people's engines were getting stolen outside the building while the matches are going on.
Yeah, there was a lot of change happening in Birmingham, like you were saying. The arena, which was the home, Boutwell Auditorium was the home, and we moved out to the other arena. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. It never did. And that arena did not have the atmosphere at all of Boutwell. It just didn't have it.
But it was nobody's fault as there. People want to blame. Here's where people want to blame Vince McMahon because they said, well, he came in and he bought the TV shows. That is really not the truth. It wasn't him that bought the TV shows. It was the infomercial that came in and bought the TV times. And they ended up paying more than what they could make on the revenue of wrestling. So what they would do is any time slot they had open, this guy would buy them. And it wasn't Vince McMahon. It was another guy, and I can't remember his name right now, but he was the king of the infomercial. And that was happening in every market in this country. So if they were having just a little bit of dip in ratings, the guy selling the sales manager, he didn't really care about ratings, though. Even if it was doing well, he didn't care about them. He cared about one thing, money. If he could make more money selling an infomercial to this guy, then that wrestling was going to be took off. It wasn't nothing Vince McMahon did. It was the infomercial that caused that problem. And I'm not saying that it didn't help that the program itself, the territory programs, Vince McMahon's was far superior. But it wasn't from the beginning. It wasn't. I think it was 1985 before it became as good as it was. Same thing happened to Florence, Alabama. Same thing happened. Florence, Alabama went from the top station, and this was a money issue, which should have never been knocked off. I think it was in the NBC affiliate there.
Channel 15.
They were paying $250 a week for the TV station, for the TV time slot. Great time slot. And for whatever reason, I believe it was David Woods, decides, oh, I'm not paying that no more. I'm going over here to Les's channel, Les White, which you couldn't pick up after you left the building from the TV station.
and that same concept happened in David Woods did to many of the markets, including Mobile. He took and pulled it off of Channel 5, I think it was, in Mobile, and stuck it on Channel 44, which was the independent affiliate in Pensacola. And it just didn't have the reach, didn't have the coverage area as Channel 5 did.
Florence was also hurt prior to that as well. Hour matches.
Now, wait a second. Now, you think that Vince McMahon told them to have an hour show in Florence?
No, I don't think so. No.
Are you saying that Vince McMahon called down there and said, I know that you're going to have a cage match tonight. I want it to take longer to put up the cage than the actual match happened. Are you saying that Vince McMahon told him to do that?
Yeah, I think he called him up and said, I think that would be a great idea for you to have
it couldn't be that the people were still living in Pensacola and wanted to get out of there so they could get home earlier. You don't think that was the case?
And remember, telephone calls were made and said, you're going to kill Florence. Why? It'd be okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what was said. When the complaint was that the cage took longer to put up than the actual match that happened inside the cage. And that was a cage match. And you can imagine if you only had an hour and 15-minute show and 15 minutes of it was putting the cage up, you can tell you how much of a show that was And what did the power to be says? Laughs in your ear on the phone. And that was the end. That we never drew another decent house in Florence since then. And before that, we were having the 45-minute matches with Dirty White Boy and Jerry Stubbs against the Nightmares. That was what happened. And then what happens? that one change is where the brother, if you will, and cousin was in the main event. They were not going to put the time necessary in. They want it out of there. And instead of putting it on first in the beginning and getting it over with and going on out of there at the first, oh, no, that we would give up our main event payoff is exactly what that was about. Which at that time, who would care? You'd put the main event on first. And at this point, every match after that would have been able to follow it, being that it only lasted for 5 minutes.
And that was not Vince McMahon.
That was not Vince McMahon.
And those were three shows in a row that were less than an hour in a row. And all you got was laughing. Vince McMahon was not the one that we called, or not us, our father. He wasn't the one that was called. So they stopped drawing and they went, oh, why did we stop drawing? It wasn't because people weren't still watching the television. Television still had great ratings. People said, don't go there. You'll buy a ticket and it'll be 1 hour show. And the intermissions will be longer than the matches. And that was the death of Florence, not Vince McMahon. That was the death of it. And then they quit being able to pay the $250 when David Woods bought it. Oh, we're not making enough money. Florence was dead. It was probably
it was purposely killed. If you want to go back, it was purposely killed. Let me tell you how good Florence was. We would set up there were some bleachers alongside the stage there at the Lauderdale County Coliseum, and they would have to move all the souvenir tables. Would have to take them down, move them up on the stage to pull those bleachers out. That place was packed, absolutely packed. And then to have sabotage, and that was all you could. That's the only thing you could say. It was complete and total sabotage. And you would think that Ron would say, "No, Robert, you're not. Let's just pull you completely out of Florence. If you don't want to go up there and work, let's just pull you completely out, because having that kind of rinky-dink show that you've had up there is just going to kill the thing off." But he didn't care. Simply did not care. He didn't care. He thought it was funny, and in the end, he did find a sucker to buy the company, though.
Yes. So, I mean, he came out.
And honestly, if you think about it, in the end, as far as David Woods is concerned, the three towns that remained pretty much consistent was Montgomery, Dothan, and Knoxville. That's because the TVs in the arenas stayed intact. Decent shows as well. But as far, but those are the only three. Those are the only three towns in the end that were decent.
And David Woods would not listen to, you're going to have to invest in Florence. If you want Florence to do well, here's what we've got to do. I worked the deal with Channel 15, I believe it was, in Florence. Great deal with them. We needed to be on there, and also worked a deal with another venue there. So, in a smaller venue, so we could work back up to the bigger venue. And David Woods would not go for it. So he wasn't willing to put the money into the business, because Florence, Birmingham had to be repackaged, reinvented,
and rebuilt for sure.
Yeah.
A massive advertising marketing campaign had to be done. And certainly the talent had to have some decent talent, because that's how Ron, if you think about it, when Ron came in after Nick Gulas with Birmingham, when he came in, what did he do? Brought in basically all new talent for the people. And that's really what needed to be done at that point.
And he is unwilling to do so.
No. And the fact of the matter is,
that was not Vince McMahon. That was
and the fact of the matter is that the talent was just, at that point, was working either for the Crockett's or for Vince McMahon. And so that whole thing about the talent not being able to change it out, you're sure you're getting new talent in, but they're not quality. They're not the quality that the people had been used to. And then in the end, you're out of business.
when you look at territories, again, Georgia Championship Wrestling did not go down and did not go out of business because of a Vince McMahon. In hindsight, if all would have worked with Vince, all those people would have came out smelling like roses. Because look at what he came out smelling. Now, I don't think WWF's program would ever have worked in Atlanta. It didn't work in Atlanta. That was one of the worst shows I think I'd ever seen. But it did not have anything to do with events. Ole didn't know how to run a wrestling company. He knew how to book a wrestling company, but he did not know how to run it. He didn't understand that Jim Barnett to keep people out, Jim Barnett to keep people happy. He was palming. He was giving a little watch here and there to some people, and he didn't understand that. And that's what he was doing. And you'll notice when Ole got there, he wasn't doing that. So those people didn't care if they were loyal to him or at all.
I mean, he was not able to cultivate the relationships of Jim Barnett for sure. That's right. And Barnett had tremendous relationships, business partners across not just in Georgia or in the northern part, all over the world, and very well respected in the wrestling business.
And so, we could really get into a deep dive. We're not going to do it tonight, but we could really get a deep dive of all the territories especially Georgia, Southeastern, while we were there in 83, 84, 85, and really count it down because there were so many. Montgomery was drawing great money because at the time David Woods owned the company, so he was really pushing it in Montgomery. And that same thing needed to be done in Birmingham. The same thing needed to be done in Florence. It had nothing to do with bad booking or bad stuff. I'm not saying that there wasn't some stuff bad, but it just did not have any. You had no way of letting the people know you were there. I remember we gave a tickets away one time to the matches. Well, they didn't even know who you were, and we were listening to them, and the poor woman said, "Nah, I don't want those. You can keep."
That's exactly right. That was right on live. That was live right on the radio.
I mean,
and that was a state, and that station was in trouble anyway. Yeah. I listened to it when we listened to it, and the guy just out of the blue called Dad on the called Dad, and then did a ticket trade for advertisement, and that was quite embarrassing.
But it didn't. Honestly, I hear people blame Vince. I've even heard the promoters. Those same people who said, "Oh, I don't like Vince McMahon. He did." No, he did not do that. You did that. You killed your own territory. Somewhat, it wasn't always their fault. In Birmingham, it was no one's fault, but television time was being bought up by infomercials. And you just wasn't going to compete with those at that point in time. You just wasn't. And a lot of those people who came into Birmingham, they wasn't from Birmingham.
And think about this. Birmingham was $1,000 a week. So you can imagine how much those people are given if Birmingham was $1,000 a week.
Yeah. And probably giving them a whole lot more than that because they packaged it into it. So that guy might have, Jack said the guy's name was Ron. I'm thinking that's Popile, the king of infomercials. He just understood. And Vince McMahon was pretty smart because he changed his way of doing business. That people will say, well, he went out and he didn't know. He had to do what he did. He had to go in and say, I'll give you X amount of dollars because he knew he didn't. He wouldn't have got television.
When I tried, let me just tell you real quick. I went up to Nashville and watched the matches and talked to Jerry Jarrett that night. And I asked him, I said, well, you know what? You should get your TV on in Chattanooga. He said, well, I like to have my TV on in Chattanooga. I said, well, give me a tape and I'll see what I can do. Well, I made a call to the TV station, and all they were wanting was money. And at the time, Jarrett said, I don't mind putting the tape on, but I'm not paying for any TVs. I'm not going to pay for any TVs down there. And he said, I'll do a barter with them, but that's it. And that they were absolutely no can do. And then I said something else. Well, they are a very well established. I said they're top rated in many other markets. He said, yeah, I know. I've dealt with Jerry Jarrett myself. And I said, well, I think this conversation is over at this point. And he said, yeah, it was over from the very moment you said this is Jarrett with Jarrett trying to get the Jarrett promotion show on. He said it was over then. He said, I'm not really interested in putting that show on here.
The difference between Vince McMahon and the other promoters of that time was he knew by talking to people, because Jim Barnett knew. If whatever people want to say, Jim Barnett was a very smart person. He knew what it was going to take to get those markets. And he knew this infomercial guy was around. And if we were going to do that, we've got to go find us some sponsors. And they did. They found sponsors. But they only found the sponsors. Vince McMahon, he spent a lot of money to get to where he was at. I mean, he spent it before he had sponsors. Now I'm in 162 cities, markets. This is how much it's going to cost you for a 30-second commercial. And that's how he built it up. But he was willing to take that expense to get there, while the other promoters unwilling to make that expense. Even the newer people that came around.
And would we try to do similar to the same thing? And we did have it. They were not willing to give us that kind of money because we weren't in enough markets. I think on minimum, it seemed like you had to be in 20 markets, which we were not.
Yes. And so it just didn't work for Vince, because he borrowed the money and he was either going to do well or he was going to go out of business. And it worked good for him because he found the sponsors. He was able to take that 7 minutes that he could sell himself, 7 minutes to the stations, and he was able to not only do that, but he never really guaranteed them a weekly deal. But what he did, I'll run this town once a month, I'll run this town every 3 months, and I'll give you $10,000. He really gave them the same amount of money, but he got advertising out of it in the deal. So wrestling was always, and I think that's the reason people have a hard time making it in the wrestling business today. It's because they didn't understand that it wasn't just as easy as booking a building and putting the ring up and let's have wrestling. There's a lot to it. And there was a lot to the territory days that made it work. And there was a lot of things that we watched because we grew up in it, of businesses that died.
And then this non-working relationship that started, and it started right at the beginning of the 80s. This thing, we're not running for anybody. We're not going to help anybody. We're not going to exchange talent. That was the beginning. I mean, that their unwillingness to work with one another was another thing that was the eventual downfall, because not being able to change that talent and bring fresh talent in regularly, eventually the people get bored and tired with it, really move on. Oh, that's the same thing I've already seen. I'm tired of seeing those.
And that is what happened. And Vince McMahon did what? Brought something different to the table, and understood he had to change. And the promoters did not change, and that was not Vince McMahon's fault. It was their fault. And we saw it. We saw it be done in these territories, the Southeastern Continental Territory. We saw it done in Georgia. We basically, we wasn't there, but we heard about all the stuff in Memphis that was going on. So many Mid-South wrestling, we watched it just go down to nothing. And
world class at one time probably could have went nationwide. I think probably in syndication, probably if I was not saying, I don't have the information in front of me right now, probably one of the top rated shows in the country, world class championship wrestling, especially Freebirds and Von Erichs. And it was a really good show. Let's just be honest. That world class show was just a tremendous show. But you notice that they were not working with anybody. They were not sending talent out. They stayed right to themselves.
And again, a syndicated program that was a forerunner to what Vince McMahon did. and would eventually do. So it's just so much. A lot of people want to just crap on on Vince McMahon when and really he did not have anything to do with it in that deal. That the television stuff was mainly infomercials and it really didn't have nothing to do with him. He was just smart enough to know how to get around it.
Mhm.
And all right, let's go to hey. By the way, I hope you enjoyed this video. Just talking a little bit about the territories of professional wrestling. That's just a small, minute. We could really go into detail of every town and how it did well, why it did well, how it did bad. Columbus, Mississippi, that's a completely different story. Than the
Oh
rest
boy.
uh, Mobile, Alabama, we watched it get killed. We watched it get destroyed. By not Vince McMahon, but by the promoters. We watched it and had a major fit over it. Our father had another time of calling and saying, "What are you doing?" It's just ridiculous. So there's so much we could do. So we hope you enjoyed this video. We hope you enjoyed the thing about the
So
territory.
that means a part 2 is coming of this.
Yeah, there is going to be a part 2 of the territories. We're going to go a little further deep into it. This is just to get everybody ready for the part 2, part 3, part 4, because there's so much we could talk about Mid-South wrestling and the where we were there when we were in '84, tremendous year, and why 1985 got so bad. And there's so much that could be said about that. And by 1986, why it was just in
It was a disaster.
I mean, how do you go having the biggest year in 1984 by 1986? You're in disaster and almost.
And don't get me wrong, 85. Well, we're going to talk about that later.
All right, let's go see what everybody's got to say. A boxing guy, Brian. How you doing, Brian Young? Hello, guys. Great to see you. Glenn Allen Shelton is with us, and boxing guy Brian did say that running.
That is correct. Yes.
The number one sport. James Brown is with us as well. I believe that's Kevin Pentley. Ain't that? Didn't that? We figured out who that was. Hi, Mr. West. And Mr. West, thank you so much. By the way, Jack Lord could not get on here today. For those of you who may read
he had technical difficulties.
James Brown, Ken Patera was a big name for Mid-South wrestling. Why did Watts fire him? There's no telling. Maybe he destroyed a McDonald's there. I don't know. Because I don't know. How long did he work for? I'm not for sure.
I don't recall him working there. If you want to, honestly, to be honest with you, I don't recall him there. He wasn't there while we were there, so it must have been pre. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What year, James Brown? What year did he work there?
Yeah, because I don't remember him working there. But now
he might have worked there when Watts was booking for McGurk.
Rick Brooks, hello guys and everyone. Mako, what's causing all this? Are you missing the third? Yeah, yes, Jack is.
He's got technical difficulties. You know what? We could have heard him, we just couldn't see him. And you know what? That might have been a blessing.
Charles Alford, hello. Let's see. James Brown said, we complained about today's wrestlers being undertrained and the ladies match. The veterans looked horrible. Yes, they did. Oh, they did. I didn't think Trish Stratus did a bad job, but I thought Lita was absolutely horrible. Just absolutely horrible. Now, I don't know, Rodney, how did the turn go with Trish?
Honestly, it looked like she missed her. It looked like she tripped and hit her with the forearm in the back of the head. It was okay, I guess. I mean, I watched it earlier. It was compared to the other turns that they have done. It was not impressive. It wasn't.
Why are they turning everybody all at once?
It's a very good question. It's like I don't get it myself. I just don't get it. It to me, when you're doing a lot of turning or gimmick matches, you've lost your way. And again, it's all preparing for something else, I'm sure. But yeah, there's been a lot of them here lately. We've had Braun Breaker. He turned on NXT, and of course, and I'm not sure you would call that turning. Is it really turning? I'm not sure if it's really turning on people anymore.
Yeah, I don't, and they're really, I can't. Cody Rhodes does not come over as a babyface to me, but I don't know. I'm thinking if I was Brock, I'd have beat him up. So I'm just
Well, I noticed at any time, and I think that we will start seeing this when people start interviewing Cody. Most people will be standing out there with a raincoat and umbrella because he spits all over you while he's talking to you. Have you ever noticed he speaks like he's kind of like he's Daffy Duck? I don't understand.
he tries to get away from that a little bit. I've noticed why he
I
was.
did, Mr. I just spit all over you. I spit all over myself.
You know, really, realistically, he couldn't beat Brock Lesnar on his greatest day he ever had. Let's just be honest. Calling spots loudly and miss head scissors and having to help to where put arms on suplexes. Yes, yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
Yeah, that's awful.
But,
Yeah,
but
I agree with you.
because they were trying. This is the problem with Lita. They were trying to have their match when those wrestlers should have been trying to have their match. There was the problem. Lita was trying to do things that she was afraid to do because she might get hurt. Same thing with Trish. They didn't need to be doing that stuff. Do what they did do best, and that's what they did years ago. They shouldn't have been trying to do the modern day bullcrap. Richard Hood, our guys running late. How you doing there, Richard? Let's see. I never heard of Georgia wrestling until they started in Cincinnati in August of 1982. But hey, remember, Rick, big time business in Cincinnati, Ohio. Guys, I've been in a hospital, but I'm much better. I'm sorry to hear that, Richard.
Yeah, I'm glad you're better.
Yeah. James Brown always heard Goulish ran 8 shows at a time with different sets of mass teams. Yes, he did that. Or where would they determine where the managers went? The biggest shows? I would say so. Yeah, because Dad used to say, man, it'd be.
And the Mighty Yankees, the interns, medics.
Yeah, Nick was bad about that. But that was bad business. So in turn, in the long run,
sure,
business was bad. When you do that, that's bad business.
Of course, the advertisement of Mr. Wrestling number 3 was always good.
All right, let's see. The thrill of walking into an arena, seeing the ring set up for a huge car Sarah has never been repeated in my life. He'll see my wife up to now was not even close. Let's see. Richard Hood. Ron Fuller was the first to introduce instant replay. Yes, we used to say at the beginning of the show. What was that we always said, Rodney?
Southeastern Television Wrestling. Innovators in television wrestling with split screen, instant replay, and other technical difficulties.
We told Jerry Stubbs that one time. I thought he was going to fall out of the car. Well, there were a lot of technical difficulties. We were there in 1983. Let's see. Curtis McKenzie ran somewhere between Goulas and Fuller. So I'm not for sure. Where is Scrappy McGallion? I guess he's in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, that's what I saw him. The last time I saw him, he came to the circus. He and his family came to the circus. It was always a good big time when we had the circus down there. I invited everybody in the wrestling business down there to come by the show.
I'm not going to put this because, I'm going to go ahead. Jack Lord, he says this. He said, if y'all can take the 2 digits off each side of the hand, you'll know my feelings about my camera time. I have a question. Your opinion, your 1989s, what was the worst territory?
1989. Boy. By that time, I think World Class was really bad. I'm sorry. I think it even was worse than Continental, but I think World Class was awful.
And Memphis was not really. None of the territories were any good.
No,
just none of them. Even Continental just.
And I really think it gets down to the fact there's no the talent. The talent got to where the wrestlers were not changed around, and the people that you replaced them with were not as good. They just were not as good. They didn't have the talent. They did not have the experience.
And the distribution of the product wasn't any good anymore. You just didn't have nowhere every TV show was a low power TV thing that couldn't get past because no promoter was willing to put the money in to make it work. So they wasn't even on great television stations anymore.
Well, and of course, Memphis, they stayed on the same time. They were never a change Memphis TV.
Well, now that was just some bad wrestling at that time. The run-in
Well, it was the run-in show, and you had to beware. Do not go over to the set. That was always deadly.
They had the same problem that wrestling today does in doing the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Well, next week is possible we'll have a contract signing. WWE.
He said 1980s. There were some during the 1980s. There were different times and different territories were horrible.
Well, right at that point, if you want to, that was southeastern Knoxville area. That was awful. It was bad. It was really, really bad. It improved. The wrestling improved, but it was too little, too late. And with the war that took place, it damaged the market really bad.
We've seen some of the worst matches with Ox Baker during that time period. He could kill your territory. Listen, Ox Baker was a huge star in the 40s, 50s. By the time 1979 come along, his stuff looked horrible, and he could kill the territory.
Yeah, he was if he got down on the mat, it was very difficult for him to get back up.
Yeah, it was. And it was. Listen, he should have been.
And it could be he was hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be he was hurt. He was still out there trying, even if he was hurt. But he would get down on the mat, and he couldn't get back up.
I have said that Wrestling 2 and Dick Slater is probably some of the best matches I'd ever seen in wrestling. But also, in the same token, Dick Slater was in some of the worst matches I'd ever seen in wrestling. He was so good at that time to that 1979 run, and while he was in Southeastern, it was just so bad. Almost everything he did was horrible. And it was never looked good. I remember when Ole went against, I believe it was Abdullah the Butcher, and I believe it may have been the Stomper, and that was a horrible match.
You're talking about Ole against Killer Carl Cox.
Killer Carl Cox. Oh my gosh, that was so bad. And
that stunk, and that when the referee turned with those were some of the best punches I'd ever seen.
Just horrible. Now Ole made him pay for it because Ole beat the crap out of that, and actually beat the crap out of him.
Out of the referee, yeah, he sure did. You know, that referee never was seen again.
No, I don't think so. I think he was in the witness protection program after that. When was Johnny Walker's last match as two? Somewhere probably in the 90s, probably early 90s.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm not for sure either. I know he was there in 1989, at the beginning of 1989. No, it was 1987 that Ron and them didn't do him right. Let's see. WTVY was the best wrestling of all time. It's great wrestling, great stuff, great storytelling. It really was. I mean, when you go back and look at the time that Southeastern starts until that TV ends, look at the crowds that Dothan, but getting rid of that TV was a dumb idea. Made no sense. You were doing such great business in Dothan. Why would you change it? I can understand maybe changing everywhere else, doing that TV in Birmingham, but you didn't have to really pay nothing for that Dothan TV. You should have kept doing that and run Dothan. I mean, it made no sense to me.
Even if you had to do two crews.
Yeah.
Send one to Knoxville and have one in Dothan on Saturday night.
Gulas had record-breaking crowds about Well, yes, he did.
Yes, and you can just go back and say that was some tremendous.
Rodney, which one of the ring announcers WWE is the best?
Since it did not clarify the year, I'm gonna go with Howard Finkel, or though that other guy, the WWF guy, the one that liked to ring the bell after every time he announced. You know what I'm talking about? LePew was his name. LePew. We loved that guy.
The original announcer from the television station.
Yes, the original announcer. He was great.
In Stanford.
He was,
Yeah, that's my jet schedule for one fall. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, I always liked that guy.
he was great. He had I saw him doing an interview. He had an attitude. Let me tell you, that guy had an attitude.
But tremendous announcer.
He was
Tremendous
an
announcer.
awesome announcer.
Now,
He was the best. When my first, the best we had out Jose Luis Rivera. Jose Luis Rivera.
he was so good. You know, I guess just tremendous voice, tremendous way of doing it.
And then was it Gary Capetta? The
Gary
people
Michael.
would, yes, they would boo him.
But you know, I liked his ring announcing style.
He had a great style, but yeah, they he would do the introductions. You know, they would say, you know, from the athletic commission, your medic or your timekeeper, and I'm your ring announcer, Gary Michael Capetta. Boo!
Good announcer though. I always liked
Great announcer.
Great announcer.
That peach tuxedo he was in that one show I watched, that was awesome.
Again, we're talking about the Paul Papel, that's the person who really changed the direction of wrestling on television. Not Vince McMahon, but the king of infomercials. That is the person that changed it. Not Vince McMahon. Vince just knew where to go with it, while the other promoters didn't want to.
Paul said that guy's name was Joe McHugh. I remember him. He would make this announcement, ladies and gentlemen, this match is a one fall with a 10-minute time limit.
He was good. I'm usually right.
Introduced first the manager, Captain Louis Albano. It's awesome.
Yeah, he was an awesome announcer. Paul says you and Rodney can fight that one. When he said he's usually right. I think McMahon was smart because he ceased early in the growth of cable. He ceased early that. Plus, he worked his guys in television and movies for cross promotion. Well, now Vince McMahon had nothing to do with Hulk on Rocky III. Actually, Vince McMahon Sr. told Hulk Hogan if he goes and does the movie Rocky that he's fired. Because at the same time is Vince McMahon Sr. that told Andy Kaufman, no, I do not want you part of my show because we're already made fun of and people talk bad about us. If we put you in there, it's going to make it worse. So he did not want his wrestlers in movies. Vince McMahon Sr., not Junior, but Hogan did not get the part from anybody in the WWF. He told him he was going to do it, and they said, well, if you do it, you're gone. He ends up leaving there, going to work for Fern. Fern used it to his ability, to the biggest bit of it. And see, Vern didn't care because he did that great movie, The Wrestler.
Yes.
I should not have said that. Many business people, wrestling or otherwise, take the victim route when their ideals or philosophies fail.
Yep.
We've all done that. I've even done that myself. Now, I'll come back later on and go, okay, I was the idiot. So I should take all the responsibility for being the idiot. Hello, all, from Michael Barr. James Brown. Would Joe Blanchard been successful on US if he had the talent? I think he would have.
Not with that production now.
No. But you know what? His show was doing very well in the ratings.
Mm-hmm. It's doing good, but it's that production was not a national show.
Just don't pull no. It's so funny that they got knocked off the television for pulling bull poo poo,
pig
poo poo,
yes,
on somebody, and years later, pig poo poo comes from the top of the building and it covers people, and they didn't do anything about it. I just don't.
Yeah, they canceled over that. That was they dumped that on Bobby Jaggers, right?
Yeah, Scott Casey didn't he?
Yeah, and that was the end. The next week, I mean, they did that. The next week, it was All American Wrestling with Vince McMahon.
Tony Richards said Jim Barnett was so smart. Yes, very smart man. He does not get the credit in wrestling business he deserves. He took his philosophy of being on television stations throughout the territory and just found a station, WTCG, WTBS, that would eventually cover the whole thing and more. Now, I don't think he knew that when he first started, but he knew what to do with it when he got it. Barnett knew what he was doing better than any promoter that our father ever worked for. And that is the truth. He was the smartest promoter. Bill Watts would come after him. But Bill Watts, the journey was not good.
Yes. When
The journey was not good for Bill Watts.
Those dark journeys he took.
Yes, those dark journeys was not good for Bill Watts. Let's see. Michael Barr, what is the deal with having a heel commentator and a face commentator? Makes the WWE sound dumb.
Their commentators in general make them sound dumb. That like I was saying last week, the whole situation with Brock and Cody was a disaster. Turned in. If you didn't listen to it, if you didn't hear the commentary, it was fine. But the commentators on there just destroyed the whole thing. They just called it like it was a match. They just called it and they said stupid stuff like Cody's only on instinct. Well, wasn't on instinct. He was not. He didn't mount any kind of offense at all. He was being destroyed. He was like in shock, but he was only going by instinct. This was moron. Absolutely stupid. And then the other guy was using some kind of thing. You have to get out of the way. The beast is going to feast. Whose idea was that? It diminished what was going on, cheapened the whole thing.
Tony Richards says is loyal to the old NWA agreements and boundaries preventing him from doing the first national expansion. I believe if Jim Barnett would have stayed in power, he would have done it, but I don't know that he would have done it in the Vince McMahon way. I believe he would have made sure that he had 2 hours of television and it wasn't a repeat. Because if you think about it, the guys that worked on the first hour went back and worked on the second hour in most cases. I think Jim Barnett would have added talent and it would have been different wrestlers throughout that 2 hours. And I think eventually he would have worked a deal where he got a percentage of some of the towns of the territories when he brought in those wrestlers. I believe that was the route.
I have a feeling that the next place he would have went to was possibly Oklahoma. He wouldn't have went to Louisiana, but he couldn't because he couldn't have got in there because of the athletic commission. Well, I mean, Barnett had ways of getting things done. Yes. So he probably could have got in there, but Bill Watts was on the outs with Jim Barnett after a incident at the NWA convention that Watts took. I mean, when Jim Barnett got back from there, he took and pulled all of his talent.
Yep. So I believe there would have been an expansion, but I think Barnett would have done it a little different. I think he would have done it because I believe he was in the process of getting enough talent that he would have had 2 groups of wrestlers, and he would have been running Ohio all the time, and he had been running Georgia all the time. I think that was his whole thought process. And Ole didn't have that concept. I still don't think he had concept. Plus, he didn't know where to get the money from if he had the concept. Jim Barnett did know where to get money from. Let's see. Dusty was on National Stand Back. Yeah, I remember Stand Back. Yeah, that was good commercials before Hulk even broke into the business. Yep. Let's see. Friz was on KTVT 11, the Superstation Fort Worth. So he had national exposure also. Yeah. And what a business. I mean, his business, just people keep on dying, was his downfall. I mean, there was way too many people dying there. And it was all over the news. So I enjoy you guys talking in depth about the Alabama Terriers. There's not very much documented history of the Gulf Coast and Continental. We could tell you a bunch of stuff that happened during that time frame. Let's see. Maybe 78, 80.
That would have been with McGurk. So and I don't have a story. Don't know the issue there with Ken Patera.
Gil said, I don't remember what year Ken was here in Mississippi, but he was over big time. Good guy. I'm thinking late 70s. Is what year he thinks.
So that would have been with the McGurks then, for sure.
Tony Richards. Let's see. This may be unpopular opinion, but I think Cody or Roman's story has a bit old school territory booking to it. Let's see. I know Triple H is the fan of the territory style booking. I have no problem with that. I have no problem.
No,
with
the internet intellectuals out there are having a problem with it, but no, this was done perfectly. It was not. I think they did the whole telegraph thing purposely. From my understanding, is that they had known for weeks that that Cody was not going over, and honestly, I don't think he should. I think exactly how they've got this worked out is exactly. I'm with them 100% on this.
I just
Even
didn't
though
like him getting beat up the next night.
no, I mean it. I'm assuming that Roman will not be on the next pay per view. Is what I feel, or the next premium show. So it's going to be Cody and Brock.
Well, by next year we'll be able to say pay per view again.
Yeah.
I believe they're bringing that back. So they're most likely turning because Raw and SmackDown are going to have a big swap out in the Raw. And okay, so they do that little draft, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Tony Richards. I can't get all this in here, so I'll just well, maybe it can get off. For example, in the old days, the heel champion would cheat, have outside help to win, then would go into the forcer policeman to push the challenger back, followed by no DQ match, cage match blow off. It's good. It's good booking. I no problem.
And it's what I figured they could get at. They could probably get 3 more big cards out of this, big houses out of this, in my opinion. And I myself, the next one would be is I would have the referees lumberjacks as I'd have all the referees out there being the lumberjacks to keep out everybody else out.
The
wrestlers in
the title for 3 minutes, then you heel would win, and we'd start the story again. And that's wrestling. That's storytelling. I was pretty happy Cody didn't win the first time out. I thought, wow, we might actually have a babyface climbing the mountain type of story here, and that's what they need. They need that. So when he does win the title, it means something. Boxing guy, Brian, what year did Fuller start doing instant replay? Probably what, 70, 77, 75, somewhere around there?
I'm not sure.
We were not the one that came up with it.
Les Thatcher developed a lot of stuff, and Vince Senior, that show was the top of the line. So he's probably right. It was probably Vince Senior actually did it first.
Yeah, because I do remember Les Thatcher came in and really had great ideas for television. And the personality profile was tremendous in the way that it was done, the way that his thought process was that he just knew what he was doing. Let's see. What year did Continental Championship Wrestling and other territory stopped showing on television? 89. I think Memphis was the last of the territories, right?
Yeah, it was the last.
Or was Don Owen? Was he?
I think Jarrett outlasted him. Don Owen was number 2, I believe.
Richard Hood, Oxbaker was an attraction.
Not in Knoxville. What?
Ken was in Mid-South in 1979.
So that would have been the time the Freebirds were there. Yeah. But as far as when you're going back watching the show, Ken Patero's not on that show.
UWF in the 90s. I'm guessing he's talking about the I guess he's talking about the Herb Abrams fiasco. UWF, that stuff was horrible. I agree. Brent Rodney when TVY was dropping Run Wrestling here, and yeah,
it was there was no reason for it. But as we heard from a story on this very program from Ron about going to work for Nick Goulas and having all those TV shows, he wasn't going to do multiple shows.
Yes. Those days and those were the best at WTVY. Yeah, we agree with that. Paul did say that his name was Joe McHugh.
Yes, it was great. That guy was my favorite.
But Ron Fuller's, I guess he was trying to keep up with Vince McMahon, which he could have done that. But there was nothing wrong with Dothan Television. The Dothan TV station was happy with it. Dothan TV, it was getting great ratings. didn't make any sense to change Dothan. The rest, yeah, I could understand. But the problem was, no matter what,
and honestly, the reason for the change was because Knoxville Channel 6 was not going to accept the Dothan show. They were not going to accept that promotion, that production. And Ron want to go back into Knoxville, so they had to do some upgrades on the TV, and that's how it happened. Also, Birmingham was starting to give them trouble over the production.
Dark Journeys leads your show going in the toilet.
Yes,
you just can't have those Dark.
That is true.
Vern wanted to get a percentage of Hogan's Japanese money, and Hogan wasn't going for it, and he shouldn't have gave him any money on it.
Not a thing.
And they didn't. I don't think they gave him any of the money on the merchandise. So again, Vern did it to himself. Vince didn't do that to him. He did it to himself.
That's right.
Could any given local television stations come back and promote wrestling at Territory Day? I believe you could if you could find the TV time. I don't know. We haven't tried, so I wouldn't know. What do you think, Rodney?
If you could get an established television time, I think it could work. But you're also talking about getting an arena as well. And I've been looking at some of these arenas about seeing, is certain days available. Lots of the major arenas, especially in say Knoxville, you're not going to get anything weekly or even monthly in some of those cases. It may be months before a date's available. I mean, there's some weeknights and stuff that you could do, but you're going to be jumping all around for that. But yeah, if you could work it out and get the arena and get your TV set, I believe you could do it. And I believe that's the way to do it, one market at a time, to make it a success. You get one market, and then you can expand into others.
There is talk. We are talking to somebody that has that concept, that running one city at a time until you establish there and you move on. But that is a long, drawn out. Me and Rodney would probably be dead before you get to every.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about, if you could get your right, look for your TV, you could get the TV time established. You can get your arena, get that worked out, your location. You had to jump around for a little while. Then it comes to the point of your talent. That will be, and I think that's for the last few shows that we've done, that has been the issue. The arena has not been the issue, or the TV, or the marketing. It came right down in the end to the talent.
Yeah. Let's see. It was terrible when Instant Replay in New York, because Vince Jr., who I think was a very underrated commentator, would say, "Let's take a look at what happened just moments ago."
That's right. He would.
I remember Smoky Mountain Wrestling feuding with the USWA. That was some good television. The Rock and Roll Express and PG-13 had some tremendous matches. Go back and see it.
By the way, Bruce Pritchard said that Vince McMahon was a terrible play-by-play announcer.
I love you.
Yeah, he said he was good at telling stories, but he was terrible as a play-by-play man. Thus saith him, as now he's in the unemployment line.
Well, this is Bruce speaking. A $1 million investment turned into $9.3 billion moneymaker for Vince McMahon. So I don't know, Bruce, Vince McMahon. I'm sorry, Bruce. I'm gonna have to put you way down there at the bottom. Memphis is running, but don't know what channel. They still have Memphis Wrestling there. That's right. They got like Championship Wrestling for Memphis or something. I watched the show. That's all I can say about the show. Jim Barnett was an excellent. Everybody thinks it's a comedy. Everybody thinks wrestling is a comedy, and I can't stand to watch wrestling because of that. Wrestling should not be a comedy for anybody watching. If you ever want to be a promoter, if you want to promote wrestling, don't make it a comedy. Comedy doesn't draw money. Never has drew money. Won't make it no big time money. Sports, entertainment, sports is what does it. 70% of Americans are sports fans, not comedy fans. Remember that if you're promoting wrestling. Jim Barnett was an excellent politician and relationship guy. I see what you're saying. He could have worked agreements possibly. Yeah, he was He was a very smart man and really a nice person. He was nice to us. Now, I don't know. He might have been not nice to everybody else, but he was nice to us. How did Adrian Adonis go from street bully to the overweight princess? For sure. I think they wanted Adrian Street, really. And Adrian didn't want to go in there and do that. I think Adrian was a smaller guy. So they wanted a bigger person like Adrian Adonis. McMahon, on the other hand, had to be a dominant control. His agreements fell apart with Paul Bosch and others. You got that old school promoter that wanted it done his way. Paul Bosch had been doing it his way.
So. And I saw those cards that Vince sent to Houston. They wouldn't be good. Dude. That way they're going to draw flies.
No, I think he wanted to make them mad eventually. I remember Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Okay, we already said that. World Class was hot for a while. Yes, it was hot for many years. Let's see. Dropping Dothan TV was the beginning of the end. Who cared what was happening in Knoxville if you lived in Dothan?
You're preaching to the choir there. If I can only spit it out.
Oh yeah,
you're exactly right. I'm going to tell you, I went and rented a video camera. We didn't have one, so I went and rented one just to take it to the shows to see if it would pass for television. And so I went and set up at Birmingham, and I did some filming because we were going to, if that was going to work, we were going to get a camera and start taking it to the arenas and filming something to show in every show. Which I was besmirched for that, by the way. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But there was a lot of plans to try to personalize those shows more so, given that personal touch. And we were on our way, and then we had the rug yanked out from under us.
Yes, guys, what would you say the best interpromotional rivalry? Well, really the only one that drew a ton of money was probably. If that was NWO against WCW, I think that was the best one they'd ever done. I don't know of any other territories that did it back in the day. I don't remember. Let's see. I enjoyed Continental. Tremendous stuff. You watch Continental Wrestling, Southeastern Wrestling, tremendous storylines, tremendous booking. It was just tremendous. In the words of Leo Garibaldi, funny don't draw money. And it really doesn't. Never has, never will. Guys, the something riddle man. Thanks y'all so much for this and your shows. You helped me. Maybe I can't just read that. What's that say?
This anxiety riddled man thanks you all so much for this and all your shows. You help more than you know. And Jack, love you too. Hope to see you next week. And that was from Brian Ray.
Prime time. Let's see.
And we thank you, Brian. We thank you for being here.
Yes, we do. Prime time says I enjoy Continental Wrestling. It was very good, very good,
very well done, and it was that was a different, certainly a different format, especially from what had been seen before.
P.S. Adrian Adonis grew up 2 blocks. I love Dick Murdoch and Adrian Adonis together. I thought they were so good together, and that's the difference between that comedy that they were doing. Because that comedy was real. They would have said, what in the world I have to go out here with all this cow poo-poo and all, what in the world am I doing out here? You don't worry about that. We got to talk about our tag. But it made sense. This guy's from New York. This guy's and it made sense but them together, they were so good together as a tag team as well. Enjoyed Mid-Atlantic Wrestling and Florida Wrestling. I thought Mid-Atlantic Wrestling was tremendous. Felt the way they did Mid-Atlantic Wrestling was great. Rodney, what's your final comments for tonight? And we'll get off of here.
Well, I think we've got her all taken care of. And I agree with many that's been on here. I enjoyed those definitely those days of growing up. I miss it. I miss that local flair to the matches. And I also miss the seriousness of the shows for sure.
And I think that's missing.
I miss that Saturday morning getting up, watching the TV show, and then that night at the arenas.
Yes.
It was, and when we got the opportunity to go a lot, that was the best days ever to be able to go to TV and to a show that night.
It was, it can come back. Believability, credibility equals audience, and I truly believe that. And I think that territories can come back, but it's going to come. It can't. One person can't handle the whole money situation. There's got to be a group of people who get together, put the money into it to make it work, and they all have a common goal. That is the problem. Even the territories was finding people with that common goal, and they just didn't have it. Some people just wanted to go out and party. They didn't care about business, and the common goal is produce great wrestling and believable wrestling, credible wrestling.
Now, I want to say one thing before we do leave. This is the reason you do not allow the internet morons to book your territory when they're out there saying that they want Rhea Ripley to defeat Roman Reigns for the WWE Universal Championship.
Oh, yes. Great booking.
Morons.
Maybe we should have booking 101 and just go through a whole series of and show the progression of a booking. And if it makes sense, or does it make sense? Because there's been times you get to the part and you go, "Yeah, that ain't gonna draw you no money. Let's throw that away and try over again." Thank y'all so much for being a part of Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, get over there and subscribe to it now. It's absolutely free. Doesn't cost you a dime. And thank you so much. Facebook growing each and every week, at least 500 new insiders each and every week, sometimes 1,000. It's according if Facebook allows me to invite all them to come in for that week. But thank you so much for making it. We've had 2 million people reached on some of our posts, and we thank you so much for that. We'll see everybody next week right here on Pro Wrestling Inside.